are things I have never told anyone. Not my sister, not the 2 therapists I saw in the years after, not the detective who drove 3 hours to sit across from me at a folding table in a police station that smelled like bad coffee and carpet cleaner, and who listened to everything I said without interrupting once, before finally picking up his pen and writing something down. I haven't told anyone because I know how it sounds. I know what people do with stories like this. They file them away under stress or overactive imagination, or she was living alone and she let herself get spooked. And I understand that, I do. I probably would have said the same thing about someone else's story before. But I have photographs, and in one of them, taken through a gap in my bedroom wall while I was asleep, there is a face looking back at the camera. It isn't mine. This was March of 2019. I had just turned 26. I had just ended a 4-year relationship that had been over for at least 2 of those years, but that neither of us had been brave enough to name. And I had just accepted a remote copywriting job that meant I could technically live anywhere, which in hindsight is a sentence that contains several decisions I deeply regret. I found the rental online, a 2-story colonial in Cavendish, Vermont, built in 1887, high ceilings, wide plank floors, a deep front porch with a wooden swing that creaked in a way that should have felt charming and somehow never quite did. The kind of kitchen that makes you feel like you should be making soup from scratch, wearing wool socks with rain against the windows. The listing price was low, unusually low for the square footage, and I told myself that was because it was rural, because it was winter, because nobody wanted to pack up their life and move to central Vermont in March. I told myself a lot of things that year. My landlord was a man named Gerald Marsh, soft-spoken, methodical, the kind of person who answers questions with slightly less information than you asked for. So you leave every conversation with the odd sense that something was withheld. He made eye contact a beat too long, not in an aggressive way, in the way of a person who has learned to control what their face does when they're thinking something they've decided not to say. He handed me the keys on a Tuesday afternoon, walked me through the house in under 10 minutes, which for a house this size was fast, and said almost as an aside as he was pulling on his coat to leave, "The previous tenant moved on fairly quickly. Some people take to old houses, some don't." I asked how quickly. He said a few weeks. I asked why she left. He said she didn't say. And then he smiled, a brief professional smile, and said, "I'm sure you'll be fine." He looked at me for 1 moment longer than necessary, that long, too steady look, and I had the sudden, irrational feeling that he was memorizing my face. And then he got in his car and drove away. I stood on the porch and watched until his tail lights disappeared around the bend in the road, and then I was alone, in a house I didn't know yet, in a town where I didn't know anyone, in March. The house had a specific quality of cold, not the kind that a thermostat fixes, the kind that lives in a building's bones, in the corners of rooms where 2 walls meet the ceiling, at the top of staircases where air pools and stills, in the bathroom at 3 in the morning when the tiles have had all night to absorb the dark. I told myself that was just age, that 1887 meant drafts, meant settling, meant 130 years of winters pressing themselves into the wood and plaster. The first night I heard tapping. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. coming from somewhere inside the east wall, not on the surface, not a branch against the siding, but from within the wall itself, like a knuckle rapping against the inside of hollow wood, patient, deliberate, evenly spaced. I lay in the dark and listened and told myself, pipes, old houses have old plumbing expands and contracts with the temperature, old plumbing makes sounds that seem deliberate and are not. This is not a thing to be afraid of. The second night, the tapping had moved. It was coming from behind the mirror now, a large gilt-framed mirror mounted on the east bedroom wall, original to the house, probably original to the room. It had the kind of weight that suggested it had never been moved, that it had been hung there once by someone long dead and had simply stayed. Same rhythm, 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I got up, pressed my ear flat against the glass. The sound was close, just on the other side, maybe 6 inches from my face. I gripped the frame and pulled the mirror away from the wall slightly. It was heavy, mounted on thick iron hardware that bit into the plaster. I angled a flashlight behind it and looked. Just plaster, just shadow, just the smell of old dust and something faintly damp. The third night, nothing, complete silence. I cooked a real dinner for the first time since I'd moved in, opened a bottle of wine, and sat at the kitchen table telling myself that whatever it had been was finished. I almost slept well. The fourth night, I noticed something that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. The tapping only happened after I turned off the lights. I tested it deliberately. Lights off, within 30 seconds, 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I reached over and switched on the bedside lamp. Silence. Immediate, total silence. Like a switch thrown on the other side of the wall. I switched the lamp back off. Waited. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. Whatever was making that sound understood the difference between light and dark. I want to be honest with you about something. There was a version of me at that point in my life who was not in a good place. The breakup had been harder than I'd admitted to anyone. Moving alone to a place where I knew no one had felt like a solution and had turned out to be a kind of punishment. So when things started to feel wrong in that house, there was a voice in my head, a very reasonable, very calm voice that said, "You are a lonely person in an old house in the middle of winter, and you are looking for explanations for things that do not need one." I listened to that voice for longer than I should have.
Now, before I tell you what I found on day 7, I need to explain something about this house. Something I didn't know until a police officer told me 6 weeks later, in a way that made the floor feel like it was moving beneath me. Because once you understand what I'm about to tell you, everything that came before it will make a different kind of sense, a worse kind. On day 5, I found something in the kitchen, a single cabinet door open. I was certain I'd closed it. I have a specific habit of closing cabinet doors that my ex had always found annoying, but I told myself I'd been distracted unpacking. I closed it and didn't think about it again. On day 6, I woke up and the bathroom faucet was running. Cold water, full pressure. I lived alone. I had been asleep for 6 hours. I turned it off and stood there for a moment, looking at my own reflection in the mirror above the sink, and I noticed that the mirror was fogged, the way a mirror fogs when someone has been breathing near it for a long time. The handprint appeared on day 7. It was on the inside of the bathroom window. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The inside of the window, the surface that faces into the room, not the street. The window sits 20 feet above a concrete pad. There is no ledge outside, no roof access, no fire escape. Nowhere at all that a person could stand on the exterior and press their hand to that glass from the outside. The print was small, closer to a child's hand than an adult's, but the proportions were, and I am going to use this word deliberately, wrong. The fingers were too long, too uniform in length, like someone had stretched them, and they were pressed flat and even against the glass with a slight indentation in the the surface. Not a smear, not a touch, but the specific impression of sustained pressure, as if the hand had been held there, pushing steadily for a very long time. I stood in that bathroom for a long time, looking at it, not moving. I called Gerald at 2 in the morning. He picked up on the first ring, not groggy, not confused, as if he had been sitting somewhere awake, waiting. I told him about the handprint, I told him about the tapping, I told him about the fogged mirror and the running faucet. I told him I wanted to know if there had been any reports of break-ins in the area, any history with the house I should know about, anything. He let me finish. There was a silence, then the pause. Not the pause of a man processing unexpected information, but the pause of a man who had already decided how much he was going to say. He said, "Don't remove the mirror." I said, "Gerald, what does the mirror have to do with any of this?" But he had already hung up. I called back 4 times, voicemail. I called the next morning, voicemail. I drove to the address he had given me as his place of business, a small property management office in a strip mall 20 minutes away. The unit was empty, the windows were dark, a leasing sign had been taped to the inside of the glass. The woman at the nail salon next door said the office had been vacant for at least 2 months.
I should have left. I know that. I have replayed those days hundreds of times, and every version ends the same way, with me packing a bag on day 7, driving to the nearest motel, and never looking back. But there is a specific kind of stubbornness that takes hold of you when you have just rebuilt your life from scratch around the idea of not needing anyone. I had moved to this house alone to prove something to myself, and I was not going to be driven out of it by sounds in a wall and a landlord who didn't answer his phone. Day 8. 3 cabinet doors open in the kitchen, all in a row. I had closed them before bed, I was completely certain. Day 9. The tapping moved again. It was coming from beneath the floorboards of the hallway now, directly outside my bedroom door. That same measured rhythm, 3 and 3, moving slowly from one end of the hall to the other, like something navigating a space I couldn't see, pacing out the distances between rooms in the dark beneath the floor. Day 10. I slept with every light in the house burning, every lamp, every overhead, the kitchen, the bathroom, the porch light outside. I lay in bed in a house blazing with light at 2 in the morning, and I did not hear a single sound. I remember thinking when I woke the next morning that maybe it was over, that something had shifted, that whatever threshold I had been slowly approaching had passed without incident. I was wrong. That afternoon, day 10, around 4 o'clock, I found the note. It was on the kitchen table, a single sheet of plain white paper, folded once. My name was written on the outside in blue ballpoint pen, not printed, not typed, handwritten in careful block letters. I had been in the house all day. I had not left. I had not had any visitors. All the doors had been locked. I had checked them that morning specifically because of everything that had been happening. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time before I crossed the room and picked it up. Inside, in the same careful block letters, were 4 words. I have always watched. That was all. No signature, no explanation, just those 4 words on a piece of paper that had not been there an hour before. I called the police. They came. They took the note. They checked the doors and windows, found no signs of forced entry, asked me a series of questions in the careful, neutral tone of people who have not yet decided whether they are dealing with a crime or a panicking woman living alone. They told me to call if anything else happened. They drove away, and I was alone again, in that house, in the dark.
I woke to silence. Not the ordinary silence of a sleeping house, the specific, pressurized silence of a space that has just stopped moving, the kind of silence that registers in the body before the mind, that wakes you not with a sound, but with the sudden awareness that something nearby has gone very still, very deliberately, the way a person goes still when they don't want to be heard. I checked my phone, 3:14 a.m. The mirror was open. It had swung outward from the wall on a hinge I had never seen, mounted flush to the frame on the left side, painted over so many times it had become invisible, the mechanism concealed entirely within the wall's thickness. The mirror had not been a mirror, it had always been a door. Behind it was a passage, roughly 2 feet deep, running the full length of the east wall. I could see it disappearing into darkness in both directions. Low ceiling, maybe 5.5 feet. A plank floor worn smooth in a central track, the way wood wears when the same bath.
I left the house with my keys, my phone, and the clothes I was wearing. I didn't take my bag. I didn't take my laptop. I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove without stopping for 40 minutes until I reached a gas station, lit up white and orange against the dark. I sat in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights, and I called 911, and I told them everything. The police confirmed the passage, confirmed the photographs, confirmed signs of long-term habitation. That was the phrase they used, long-term habitation, in the concealed space behind the east wall. A forensics team spent 2 days in that house. They found fingerprints in the passage that did not match any profile in the system. They found marks on the plank floor, consistent with regular traffic over a period they estimated based on the wear pattern of between 3 and 5 years. 3 to 5 years, in a house I had lived in for 11 days. They told me that the house, like many New England colonials built in the late 19th century, had been constructed with what architects of the period called servant passages, narrow corridors built into the structure of the walls themselves, running between floors and behind rooms, designed so that domestic staff could move through the house, carrying laundry, coal, food, without being seen or heard by the household. Whoever had been living in my walls had been using them for the same purpose, to move without being seen, to be present without being known. They never found who had been in the passage. They never found who the photographs were taken by. The case is technically still open. I checked last year. Nothing new had been added to the file in over 3 years. And here is the thing I have turned over in my mind every night for 6 years, the thing I always come back to, the thing I cannot make peace with. I had lived in that house for 11 days. But the photographs, the ones from Portland, from the apartment with the cracked plaster and the radiator I could never get to stop hissing, those photographs went back 4 years. Which means that while I was ending a relationship and deciding to start over somewhere new, and choosing from a list of available rentals a house in Vermont with an unusually low price, someone already knew where I was going. Whoever was watching me was not watching a person who had moved into a house. They were watching a person. Full stop. I still don't know who Gerald Marsh was. I still don't know how long this had been happening before I noticed, or whether it is still happening now, in whatever city I live in whatever building I think I know. I don't know if there were others before me. I don't know if there will be others after. Some questions don't get answered.
That is the part the movies always get wrong. The resolution, the explanation, the moment where everything is accounted for and the fear has a shape you can name. Real fear doesn't work like that. Real fear is the thing that stays open. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. There are more stories like this one. Stories the news cycle forgot. Cases the police closed without resolution. Things that happen to ordinary people in ordinary places that no one talks about publicly, because talking about them publicly means admitting that the world is less safe than we pretend. If you want to hear them, subscribe. I'll be here. And if you have one of your own, leave it below. I read every comment, every single one. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors. And maybe, just maybe, check behind your mirrors before you go to sleep tonight.